I'm Heather Wooden. I'm the IEST Meetings and Education Program Coordinator. If you aren't aware of who IEST is, we're a membership association that gives technical guidance to professionals working in controlled environments. It is the only organization that exclusively serves professionals responsible for the design, test, evaluation, and of products and systems, the detection, measurement, and control of forms of contamination associated with and resulting from manufacturing, biomedical, and industrial operation, and the science, engineering, and technology conducted at the nanoscale with an emphasis on nanotechnology research and development. We also help to develop, write, and publish industry recommended practices through our working groups, and that's going to be what we're talking about today, one of our recommended practices or RPs. And IEST is also an ANSI accredited standards developing organization, the Secretary of ISO TC209 clean rooms and associated controlled environments, and the administrator of ANSI accredited US tag to ISO TC209. So we do have a few of you on the phone. We're going to go ahead and do introductions. If you are unable to figure out how to unmute yourself, please let me know. So I'll go ahead and have you guys introduce and say your name, company, and then what one takeaway you would like from this webinar today. So to unmute yourself on the phone, it looks like you need to do *6 to unmute, and then to mute yourself again, you would do the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead, and it looks like, and I don't know if you're which caller you know you are, but call-in user 3, you can go ahead and try and unmute yourself and introduce yourself. I'm not sure if it'll work or not because you're on the phone. We'll wait a second. Or we have a call-in number 4. Go ahead. We can't hear you. Go ahead. I hear you now.
This is Jan Udy. I'm with Jan E. Udy Consulting, and I just wanted to learn more about the supply chain for clean room gloves.
All right, thanks, Jan. And I know we have one other person on. It looks like they might be having problems unmuting. So we're going to go ahead and just get started. I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. So Greg Hyland is the owner and CEO of ValueTech, a manufacturer of clean room supplies. He is the current fiscal vice president of IEST and has served on many IEST working groups, including this working group, IEST working group CC005. So Greg, you can go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you, Heather, for the introduction, and it's my pleasure to present the RP Spotlight, and we're going to be talking today about the IEST Recommended Practice 005.4, which is on clean room gloves. The presentation is going to be in 3 components. The first component we'll talk about risks. The second component is what is a recommended practice, and the third component is risk management. You can see I've broken the market risk down into a number of components because there are a number of things that are adversely impacting the market right now. Labor, COVID, logistics, raw material, quality, purchasing practice, and pricing trends. When it comes to an RP, there are really 3 things that are the key takeaways. The standards, reproducibility, and cleanliness level. And then the third component is also broken into 3 pieces. We'll be talking about redundancy, considerations, and qualifications. So when we look at the market risk, the primary market risk as it relates to labor is COVID has created the restriction of labor movement, and because workers are not able to move and some workers are restricted with the countries that they're in, there is a shortage of labor. That has been coupled with the fact that there are some glove dippers that have been hot listed by the FDA. In particular, Top Glove is a major glove manufacturer. They are currently having Malaysia violations and US government violations, meaning that product being manufactured by them, the containers are being seized. There's a number of other manufacturers that are on the watch list. And the reason for this is because there are some manufacturers that are not complying with what we'll say good labor laws. And so the constriction of labor has created a risk factor. Specifically, COVID has created another risk factor as it relates to labor because most of the clean room gloves are manufactured in Malaysia. And within Southeast Asia, in particular Malaysia, you have very low vaccine rates. And they have something called MCO, which stands for Motion Control Order. So based upon the number of cases, they have different levels of lockdown, and actually manufacturers are being allocated to what they can manufacture. Most recently, there have actually been 4 major manufacturers that have had lockdowns, meaning they're completely shut down. So when a facility is shut down, obviously that constrains glove availability. The second market risk factor is logistics. And I'm sure that some of you have probably seen some of the challenges with global logistics, but the biggest challenge is that prior to COVID, there was a predictability to shipping containers. And by that, I mean containers that had their origin in China typically would end up in Long Beach. Well, as a result of COVID, there have been a lot of orphaned or empty containers. The Suez Canal affected all the terminal and the ports schedules. Actually, there's a major port in China, Shenzhen, and there's another port, Ningbo, that have been having shutdowns because of COVID outbreaks. The average booking fee to a container has gone up anywhere from 4 times to significantly more than 4 times. And another impact that's affecting the logistics is the transit time. Because transit times are significantly longer, it means that there is increased cost because distribution and manufacturers need to have higher inventory load levels. Let's talk about the market risk of raw material. The demand for nitrile has spiked to the point that the cost of the raw material has gone up on average 3 times. And most trade terms have been eliminated by the raw material manufacturers, which puts a constraint on the glove dippers. In terms of quality, there have been a lot of new entrants into the market. In particular, gloves are coming in from China. That's a fairly new phenomena. And we're uncovering in the market that some of these gloves have a significantly high level of filler. And filler is something that affects the performance characteristics of the glove. 2 more market risks are what I'll call purchasing patterns. So customers began hoarding of gloves, and the hoarding of gloves basically created a spike in demand. And so supply chain thought there was actually more demand than there was because some people purchased more gloves than they needed to. Many manufacturers moved their production from clean room style gloves to exam gloves because there was more profit to be made in the examination gloves. And then there's basically a limited supply of dippers that have the capacity to dip a clean nitrile glove. And as a result of this, the demand just exceeded the supply. In terms of the pricing trend, you can see the numbers are really ugly. We started the beginning of the year with exam gloves at 300% their rate. They have now gone down to about 225% of the cost of pre-COVID levels. And the price of clean room gloves is about steady at 2x what it was pre-COVID. So that concludes talking about the market risks, and it really is a perfect storm. There's never been a time in the industry since I've been in the industry, since 1982, when there's been really the combination of all of these factors creating risks to people that use gloves. The next component is we're going to talk about what is a recommended practice and why you should care. A recommended practice basically puts forth standard terminology and methodology. So we all have the same vocabulary and the same methodology for testing gloves. The second key advantage of a recommended practice is it allows you to have independently reducible test results. What I mean by that is when we develop these recommended practices, we always have 3 labs that have to triangulate the test data. By that, we have the same lot product that's sent to lab A, lab B, and lab C. And if the labs cannot produce independently reproducible test results within an acceptable variance, we determine that the test methodology isn't valid because it's not reproducible. And then the third advantage of an RP is the RPs have basically established for gloves what I'll call industry cleanliness standards. So there's cleanliness standards levels based upon ISO and applications. So let's get right into looking at the different levels of clean rooms, the description of the glove, the substrate material, and then as you go across the columns to the right, you can see we're summarizing the cuff length, the packaging, how the glove is chlorinated. Is it single chlorinated or double chlorinated? How the glove is water washed offline. By how it's water washed, I mean, is there a water washing? Is it done with filtered water or is it done with 18 mega ohm DI water? And then the next column is the liquid particle count. And basically the liquid particle count is a test methodology that's outlined in the CC005, where you take a swatch of the glove or you can take a full glove. And before you test the glove, you take your ultra pure water and you run it through a liquid particle counter to get a baseline contamination count of the water. Then you put the glove in the water and you agitate it for a set period of time. You remove the glove from the water and then you do your test result on the water after the sample has been titrated in it. Also, there's a sampling methodology that you take a glove from the top of the bag, the bottom of the bag, and the middle of the bag, because typically gloves that come in contact with the plastic have higher contaminant levels. And you can see here basically the thresholds for liquid particle counts. And it really doesn't start till you get to ISO 6, where generally those gloves are 2,500 particle count of less than a half a micron. And then you go down to 1,500 microns, 1,000 microns, and 500 microns. So these are, think of them in terms of the hurdles of cleanliness from a liquid particle count standpoint. Then we've also included NVR, which is non-volatile residue, ions, and organics. And so this is a helpful guidance sheet to basically roadmap to you the 3 primary substrate materials are PVC, latex, and nitrile, nitrile being the most common, and then how they're packaged, cuff lengths, and generally accepted cleanliness levels. My next slide is compact and there's a lot of information here. So if your screen is not large enough, please reach out to IEST separately and I can email this document over to you. But basically what you see in this document is a product specification comparison, taking some of the leading clean room nitrile gloves. So you can see across the top, we have ValueTech, we have a Halyard glove, we have a Kimberly-Clark Kimtech glove, we have a VWR CertaClean glove, and we have 2 styles of gloves from Ansell. And basically what this document does is it takes the published manufacturer's specification. In the bottom left, I've highlighted in red where there's some different units of measures so that you can correlate from one manufacturer to another. But I think this document is very important to illustrate that as you go down and you look at the characteristics, most of the generally recognized cleanliness specifications are all the IEST RP CC005. meaning that the IEST RP is recommended is the kind of globally recognized standards for cleanliness. There are some test methodologies related to tensile strength and mill thickness that are not the IEST methodology, but all your cleanliness specifications, which is your liquid particle count, which is the ionic level, the NVR, these are all called out towards the IEST test methods. So I've shared with you, just to summarize briefly, the risks inherent currently with the clean room supply chain and how that's affected clean room gloves. Secondarily, we talked about what is an RP and how the methodology and the standards are very important because it gives us a level playing field. It gives us common standards. Next, I want to talk about what's the path going forward? How do you mitigate risk? How do you manage your risk? How do you build the most resiliency and redundancy in your supply chain? The first recommendation is to specify a primary and a secondary glove manufacturer. This is important because, as we've seen during COVID, having the same glove available from redundant distributors does not give you redundancy. In effect, it just exacerbates the problem because everyone is racing to the same product that is supply constricted. The primary glove might have the majority of your consumption. 60% is a good measuring stick. But the secondary glove provider should have an ongoing and active contribution to your facilities for gloves. This is very important because all critical cleanroom gloves are on allocation. And if you do not have a consumption with your secondary or alternate supplier, you really don't have any redundancy because if there's no allocation, there'll be no product manufactured. The manufacturer won't provide that product to your distribution channel partner, and it's just a false sense of redundancy. So the first step in terms of a winning strategy to mitigating your risk is to have redundancy, a primary and a secondary glove manufacturer. What are some considerations that you should be thinking about to qualify a glove? Probably one of the biggest one is, do you have internal requirements or specifications that you're currently using? With some facilities, they have rigorous SOPs, which are standard for different manufacturing areas. Other facilities aren't so sophisticated. And in the absence of having documented internal requirements or specifications, it can be very cumbersome to qualify something new when your standard is really just the acceptance of your incumbent product. Some things that you should be thinking about is if the gloves are for an ISO 5 or 6 that are sterile, what's your sterility requirements for bioburden? Do you have a sterility assurance level? Is it 10 to the -6th or 10 to the -3rd? Another consideration is, what is the total particulate count requirement for the gloves being used? Not only the total particulate count, but a very important question to ask when qualifying a glove is, at what point a particle on a glove considered a defect? Because all gloves have some particles. It's just a question of the number of particles and the size of particles. So even before you start to look at the cleanliness level of the glove, it's really important that you look at your internal SOPs for at what point is a defect considered a defect. Then another consideration that sometimes isn't so obvious is, does your current incumbent glove even meet your performance standards? And please note, as a result of COVID, there have been a number of manufacturers that have changed some of their formulations. They've changed the country of origins. One of the things that we uncovered during the survey that we sent out to people regarding this webinar is over 80% of the participants recognized a change in the consistency and the quality of their incumbent glove. So don't assume a glove that you qualified 5 years ago is necessarily the same glove that you're getting now. And then most importantly, are you collecting trend data? Because it's one thing to say that your glove meets specification, but it's another to understand lot to lot to lot over time. How is that glove trending with regards to the specification? What are the steps to your manufacturer qualification program to bring on a new manufacturer for your critical, what we'll call low total particle or sterile materials that are used in your ISO specified clean room or controlled environment areas? And this has been a real hot potato because also uncovered in the survey, the majority of the respondents at some point during COVID have had a stock out on their glove, which has forced what we'll call emergency measures, meaning that you have to fast track the qualification of a product. Is it possible to use a low particle glove that's typically used in 3 to 4 areas, a non-sterile glove for some applications, in lieu of a sterile glove used in conjunction with the sterile sleeve? This is an important consideration because, as you remember earlier, I mentioned there are currently significant labor issues as it relates to the manufacture of gloves. The post process in the packaging of a sterile glove is very, very labor intensive. And so one of the reasons why sterile product is on significant back order and much longer lead times is there literally just are not enough people to take the gloves, fold the cuff, and put them into the pair pack. So some people are considering going to a cleaner glove and a sterile sleeve. Is this an option for your facility? The point that I would really like to stress is that any testing that you perform in your facility that's outside of the scope of the manufacturer's quality testing is at risk for failure. Let me repeat that. Any testing that you performed in your facility outside of the manufacturer's quality testing is at risk for failure, since it cannot be assured that the testing is performed consistently unless qualified. And the reason why I really want to focus on this is there are many facilities that have what we'll call their own home brew or internal test methods that they've developed over time, and it's supported them reasonably well. But now they're at risk of qualifying new products because if the test method cannot be reproducible by your manufacturer, you have little assurance that the glove that you qualified today is going to be the same glove in 3 months unless you set up internal testing on every incoming test method. And the only reason I really want to focus on this is the IEST has had this recommended practice document literally for decades, and we have tried literally numerous test methods outside of those that have become the common standard. And the reason why we have narrowed down the test methodology that we have is that it's independently reproducible. And if the test methods can't be independently reproduced by 3 labs, you're really at risk for failure. And then something that goes without, sometimes without notice, is it's one thing to have a glove that meets your cleanliness requirements. It's another thing to have a glove that I'll call does Mikey like it. And by that, I mean, if the glove doesn't have the right tactile sense, if it doesn't have the right dexterity, if it doesn't afford the operator the ability to do their best work when they're donning the glove, it's of little solace that the glove is clean. You're not going to have adoption. You'll have people that will try to take gloves off. You'll have people that won't properly use the glove. You'll have operators that are not confident because the glove is not giving them good tactile feedback. And so it goes without mentioning that a significant consideration is your operator involvement to make sure that your operators feel that the glove allows them to perform their best work. Finally, let's talk about qualification. I've seen some facilities that can fast track the qualification of a glove in 30 days. I've seen some facilities that it can go on for 18 months because they are under FDA audit, they're launching a new product, they're basically under a stay order. They can't change any manufacturing process. So you need to recognize that a manufacturing qualification program is not for the faint of heart. This is typically not a one and done type of a program. The most important thing that I alluded to before is, do you have a written manufacturer quality documented program? This is really important because in the absence of this, your supply chain and your transaction purchasing people are just going to go out and buy whatever glove they can get their hands on. And believe me, we've seen that happen in COVID. A lot of facilities have ended up with non-compliant gloves because the facility doesn't have an internal spec that supply chain can use to gate to make sure they bring on board the right product. Then secondarily, as it relates to qualification, what happens in an emergency? Do you have an emergency provision for qualifying a new manufacturer if you're in a stockout position? We've seen this happen in countless facilities that they can't get the incumbent product. And if there's not any emergency provisions, you might just be stuck with what you can find on Amazon or Google or an internet search. If not, can your SOP be amended to include the concurrent qualification of a new manufacturer on an emergency basis? If the new manufacturer can be qualified on a concurrent basis, then after qualification, will that manufacturer be added to the qualified manufacturer list? This goes back to my initial point that the most redundant risk mitigation strategy is to have a primary and a secondary glove approved and referenced in your internal manufacturer qualification program. So the best practice is you reference what your specifications are, your test data, your thresholds, and then you actually specify in the document that you have found at this time that brand A and brand B are approved for manufacture because they meet specification. Point 5 is a real sticky wicket. Is there a change notification process set up with each manufacturer to be notified as soon as possible if any changes to the manufacturing processes, raw materials, or manufacturing site? And let me be the bearer of bad news, because we do a lot of testing on gloves to confirm the cleanliness of our product and the variability of other competitive products. And over the last 18 months, I've personally witnessed more variability in raw material formulation, post-processing, even manufacturing sites. So it's not uncommon for you to order one part number and have that glove come from a different country of origin, even with a different manufacturing formulation. Now, granted, maybe it still meets the cleanliness specifications, but in terms of the performance attributes, it is not the same glove. So you want to make sure that you have a rigorous change notification and that your manufacturers are on alert that if there's any change to the product, you're going to be notified in advance. Now, what's the good news in all this? The good news is that leading glove manufacturers will offer IEST-based testing results. That's important because the IEST standards are globally recognized and they're reproducible. So you can get from the manufacturer the IEST-based testing results. Leading manufacturers are willing to provide a certificate of compliance documentation with each lot so that you have the assurance that lot to lot to lot, you're still getting a product that's compliant. Leading manufacturers all have in-house quality control testing with their own quality control staff so that if necessary, they can do additional testing. Or if you want to have testing done on retention samples, they'll keep up to 36 months of retention samples and be able to do spot checks on those. And then finally, your best manufacturers will offer what we call lot test trending summaries. This is very important because it's one thing to be within the specification, but it's another thing to see how is that product trending lot to lot to lot over the last 12 months. And I think that you're going to find leading glove manufacturers will welcome that opportunity to share that information with you. So we've covered a lot of information in a very short period of time. Let me just summarize by saying it's not business as usual. There are significant risks to glove sourcing. And these risks have been brought about by COVID, they've been brought about by labor issues, by logistics, by quality, by customers hoarding material, and by pricing. So just because you have a glove now that's performing, don't be numb to the fact that it is a very high risk environment currently for gloves. The second thing that we covered is recommended practices and who cares about them. Well, the recommended practice provides the vocabulary, it provides the terminology, it provides a standard whereby we've all over time, and by all I mean industry leaders, users, manufacturers, have found out that this liquid particle count test method, this extractable test method, these are the best methods because they're reproducible. They can be independently reproduced so that you have assurance that the glove you specify now is the glove that you get in the future. And then finally, what we really talked about is, since there are risks and you have the recommended practice that allows you to look at and consider products that are most appropriate, how do you build and how do you manage your risk? And really, risk management is about spreading the risk. It's about not being sole sourced. It's about having a strong primary and a secondary glove manufacturing partner so that you basically mitigate your risk and you have allocation from two leading glove manufacturers. And then in order to do that, you need to really understand what are your specifications, your requirements for cleanliness, but also at the operator level. And then finally, how do you go about qualifying? So I hope this information was helpful. And if any of you want that one document that highlighted all of the test methodology among the leading brands, I'd be more than happy to send that out. And let me just open it up. Are there any questions?
Yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and you can raise your hand. There's a little, at the bottom of the screen, there's a little smiley face, and that's where you can raise your hand if you have a question. If you do not have a mic, you can type the question into the chat bar as well too, and then I can read it to Greg. So we'll go ahead and give everyone a few minutes to see if they have any questions on anything that was discussed today. And you can go ahead and unmute yourself too as well. And while you're thinking of questions, just a little information, we will be having this webinar up and available within the next couple of days or so for the recording. So if you need to go back or if you want to send this information on to a colleague possibly, then this information will be available on the IEST website within the next couple days. And then after the webinar here, you will be receiving a coupon code to be able to use to purchase this RPCC005 if you do not have it already, or if there's any other RP you wish to purchase as well. And that will be emailed to you after this webinar as well. Does anyone have any questions on what Greg spoke about or have anything related to gloves and finger cuts that you have questions with? Greg, I don't see any questions coming in. I don't know if you've seen any common questions related to this topic that you could possibly discuss or something like that you've seen and come across a lot of?
Yes. Probably one of the biggest things that I've seen is complacency. Just the fact that, well, we've got some gloves now, why worry about it? And really that complacency is really adversely affected a lot of people. And the survey highlighted this because many people, a change order to change a glove can be very strenuous. And so a lot of people tend to avoid looking at gloves and qualifying alternate gloves because in some facilities it can take a real act of Congress to do that. And I think I would just really challenge, I would just challenge everyone to not assume that you're in a stable state, because right now there's just so many variables that are at risk. Every week we're running into a situation where, facilities are having adverse negative impacts because of the variability with the gloves. That's something that we've seen quite a bit. Another thing that we've seen is sometimes customers are hesitant to engage the manufacturer and really, challenge them to help make the qualification process go easier. And I think definitely with the number of the manufacturers that are active with an IEST, and I can definitely speak for ValueTech, that we recognize that it's a journey. It's not just this decision, oh, do I buy this glove or that glove? It's really, there's a lot of variables involved. And to have a winning strategy and really to manage the risk, pick your glove manufacturing partners well. Pick the people that you think are going to be in it for the long haul, that when you ask a technical question, that you don't get the response, oh, good question, let me look into it. Your leading manufacturers should have a high level of technical competence to help you navigate things. Then probably the final challenge that I see, Heather, is that perfection's in heaven. There is no one glove that's a perfect 10 on everything, right? There's some gloves that are incredibly clean, but when you have a very clean glove, that tends to have a slippery or a surface. There are some gloves that have really high ESD characteristics, but they're trade-offs. And so I think that the customers just need to recognize that there's no perfection as it comes to gloves. One of the challenges with providing a glove that has the highest tactile sense is that tends to be a thinner glove. Well, if you make the glove too thin, it's going to be more likely to tear through. And there's the trade-off, right? You can have a glove that has very high tactile sensitivity with a different modulus, but it's not going to have the tensile strength, so it's going to burst out. And so this is where there's no one easy answer. Finding a glove ultimately is a compromise. It's, what do you value most importantly, and rank those, and then make your glove selection accordingly.
All right, thank you, Greg. Any last questions before we end today? If you can see, I don't know if everyone that's on the computer, you can see that Greg's contact information is right there on the slide. So if you think of any questions related to the document or gloves in general, you can go ahead and email Greg directly as well. And I do want to make a mention of some upcoming IEST training that will be happening. We do have quite a few upcoming training webinars that are coming up, as well as our education conference that's going to be held either in person in Schaumburg, Illinois, or you can attend virtually as well. But you can find out information about all these upcoming trainings that we have available on the IEST website. It's on the main homepage, the list of all the current webinars and events and trainings that we have coming on. So if there aren't any more questions, we'll go ahead and then end it for today. And like I said, you'll be getting an email with the coupon code, and then we will be having this webinar available online on the IEST website within the next couple of days or so. So everyone have a good rest of your day, and thank you so much, Greg, and thank you everyone for attending, and have a good day. Bye.